What the Slave Food Project is, why it's so complex for those of you out there who haven't watched it or seen it, is that it's not just a focus on food. It is looking at the intersection between stress, which everyone faces, the unique
Mm,
stressor of racial discrimination,
mm.
right? It could be racial discrimination, it could be gender, it could be orientation discrimination that's there and its impact in the development of health disparities. But here's another unique component: nutritional stress. This relationship of how our food is related to our stress and our reaction, and that all leads in this crucible of conflict that leads to the birth of disease.
Hi, Dr. Batiste. Thank you so much for joining Staying Ageless today.
Oh, so good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you too. I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
Same. I can't complain. There's so much to complain about.
Right.
You have to focus on the positivity, on gratitude, and there's more to be grateful for
Amen.
than to be upset about. That's for
For
sure.
sure. For sure. So I wanted to start with, how did you get into cardiology? And in particular, how did you then transition into like incorporating dietary interventions into treatment for patients?
Wow, wow. So I'm gonna try and be concise because that right there can be about half an hour right there. That whole evolution. But no, just joking. But simply, my dad, he grew up out of that era where education was everything. It was everything. And so growing up, it was one of the three things: are you going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or a business person? Which are you going to be? Right. And so unfortunately, I predate all the computer, all the games and everything. So I'd sit there sometimes after I got over the five, six channels that were on TV, and growing up in Compton, I would flip through the book, and I was like, man, the encyclopedia. I wanted to be a doctor, and so in my mind, I wanted to be the Lakers team doctor. I grew up watching Magic Johnson and James Worthy, Reem, and I realized that my 5'10", 10 inch frame was not going to make it to the NBA. And so I wanted to be the Lakers team doctor. And so when I left California and went to a historically black college and university, Oakwood College, now university in Alabama, what I realized was that, man, I'm not sure if I'm going to be an orthopedic surgeon. And I spent one rotation at the University of Virginia, and it happened to be with an African American female cardiologist. And I fell in love with the heart. And it was the thing that made the most sense.
Mm.
It was just, I connected to it. It's just rhythmically, the way it worked, the pharmacology, I could make sense of it. It wasn't something I had to memorize. And so you talk about love affair. I developed a love affair of the heart in that moment. And what's interesting, ironic, is that I wrote in my college graduation book or the yearbook that I one day wanted to be chief of cardiology, and be a cardiologist, chief of cardiology. Although I said UCLA, that later happened within Kaiser
Right.
Permanente. Yeah, yeah. So good stuff.
Okay.
So
That
that
is awesome.
that was how that happened. And ironically, once I started this journey, I really got into taking care of patients, which is really what life is about, taking care of patients. There was one consistent thing. Hey, doc, what should I eat? Hey, what should can I exercise? And I wasn't trained. You've heard this 1,000 times. Docs aren't trained in nutrition or lifestyle, not aggressively. Things are changing slowly. And so I gave these little off the cuff quips. Just do well majority of the time. You know what? The 4/7 rule. I said, you don't love anything 100%. I said, just the majority do well. All this kind of light and fluffy stuff. And it wasn't really, so I started starting to read. I picked up every book. As long as it had a doctor's name on it, I picked up a book not from a great library, not from a university, but from Barnes and Nobles is what I did. And
Yeah.
long story short, around that time, my dad just really dovetailed in terms of his diabetes and his condition that I grew up with him having, ever since I was a kid. And his life ended. And I remember sitting back in reflection in that moment and
Mm.
wondering what I didn't do to really help him. And after I came out of that fog and that disappointment and that grief that was overwhelming, I I really dug into literature and the books, and there was one consistent theme that came out of it, which is the importance and the power of lifestyle, the importance and
Mm,
power of lifestyle, and really cutting to the chase that we have to be targeted in our approach and very intentional in our efforts to deliver this. And I felt that I did my father a disservice as his son. I did my father a disservice as his son, who happens to be a physician. And I did my patients a tremendous disservice that would sit there telling me, "Hey, doc, thanks for saving my life." Well, did I really? Who came back to see me a second and third and fourth time in the procedure lab and said, "Hey, doc, you did a great job. Oh, I'm glad it's you." Really? I did a great job, but you're back. What changed? And so
right.
that was really the springboard that shifted the trajectory of my career. Not to say I left aside all the things of Western medicine, because I haven't. I still put in stents, I still write prescriptions, but my focus has completely shifted, completely and wholeheartedly shifted over towards the important aspects of life, which is exercise, nutrition, and stress. Those are the key components.
Mm. So good. So good. Especially the part about going to Barnes and Noble University, child, because I'm sorry, I don't think that people with credentials read enough.
Yeah.
I think that we should, I mean, health and nutrition and medicine is constantly evolving. And so we should be required to be on the cutting edge of what is happening and be aware and be reading all the time, honestly. But that's my nerdy opinion.
No, you know what? Listen, you're absolutely right. And so, I mean, for those of you who haven't watched, and thank you, by the way, for watching. One of the things we'll talk about later on, the project I'm working on in my heart. But one thing we say in there is we give several equations. But one of the equations we give is that stress equals demands minus resources. And we speak about resources go where value is placed. Resources go where value is placed. So follow this line of thought, right? So in medical school, you put resources into what you value. So I put
Mm,
resources into education to what's valued, my test. That test doesn't test you for lifestyle, for nutrition,
mm,
or for exercise. So I don't value that. Now I go
yeah,
side of training, and I am going to have to take another test to pass and become board certified, what everyone wants to see. So now, once again, where do I put resources? Well, the testing, once again, does not test you on
mm,
lifestyle, on nutrition. So once again, physicians they're taught by habit and by influence not to value, to devalue those things. Now I come into practice, and let's say that I do want to emphasize that. Well, reimbursement does not value lifestyle historically. So now where do I put my
yeah,
resources as an independent provider? Not there. And so that's where the problem is. It's so convoluted as to why providers do not invest the time into reading and researching and really looking in the same way they do about the new pills that come out, in the same way that we do as it relates to new
yeah.
procedures and so forth. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
I'm glad you brought that up and just how the chain of thing flows. Because when I started my career, I worked in a clinic with doctors and I found myself often giving them studies. Like, didn't you see this study? Like, they were stuck in literally the 90s. Like, have you missed
Yeah,
all the things that have happened from 1990 to the present, you know?
absolutely.
So I found that just fascinating. I was like, wow, that is very interesting.
It
No.
is.
So let's talk about your presentation. So I watched this slave food presentation by you and your brilliant doctor partner friend. And I'm going to put that link in the show notes because I think that people should watch it. It's going to take y'all some time to watch it, but you should. So watch it. Um, and I thought it was brilliant for a couple reasons. I thought it was brilliant because when I heard the title of the project, when I heard slave food, I thought, oh, cool. Okay, they're going to talk about how soul food is really like, came from slavery and like, you know what I mean? And like, oh, it's actually not that good for you. But you took it to a whole another deeper level. And I was like, oh, okay. This is, I was like, okay, we're going deep.
That's
Okay,
right.
so let's start with, can you break down for people what your definition of slave food is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first, let me ask you a question. I know this is your
Yeah.
show. What what really struck you when you heard the title slave food?
Hmm. What do you mean?
Well, I
Like I
mean,
get
so we get so many different responses, like
yeah,
a visceral response. Either
yeah,
we love it, or how could you, or why are you being divisive like this as it relates to just the title? The title
yeah.
grabs people in terms of slave food or the slave food project. So I'm
Yeah, like I think for me, I mean, I'm in the business of helping people get over their addictions, and so and using behavioral change to do this. So for me, I although that was there, my mind immediately goes to soul food, chitlins. You know what I mean? Like that's where my mind goes to, and I go, wait a minute, is this some sort of like, you know, it's tricky. It's a tricky thing to talk about soul food because just like I'm Nigerian and I have cultural foods, soul food is a cultural part of African American history. And so for me, I'm always trying to get people to embrace their cultural foods, but change the ingredients because a lot of times those ingredients be killing people. You know what
yeah,
I mean?
absolutely.
So I was on the fence. I didn't have any like super crazy visceral responses to it.
Yeah, no, no, I appreciate that. And when I look at what is slave food, and there's a difference from the slave food project. So I'm gonna start first with my thoughts on what is slave food. So
Okay.
slave food, what we know historically, for the most part, were the cast-offs, the refuse, the things that were discarded, the parts of the animal that those in power did not seek to use anymore for their subsistence, right? It was essentially the manipulation of nutrition for profit and for power that was done from the moment
Yeah.
of the transatlantic slave trade all the way through, of measuring the amount of food that's given and the right amount to keep you just well enough to work, but not strong enough to really fight. And so when we look at slave food, that's a significant component. Now, here's the thing. I believe that soul food is somewhat of a reflection. It's more of we're sitting there and it's like, let me memorialize this slave food. Let me celebrate what making lemon
Mm,
lemons. But where we lose sight of is the fact that we lose sight on the resiliency of that population who was enslaved, and how they sought and they grew vegetables in the backyard. They woke up early mornings before they had to go out and work the fields and work their own fields. That they tended to it, and they supplemented
yeah.
the diet with resiliency. That resiliency. And so I would love to see resiliency actualize, as opposed to the remnants that are that are celebrated.
Mm,
Celebrate the resiliency of that
yeah.
population, of the fruits and the vegetables and those things that they were able to create, really, and to make that. I think that we should recognize, in theory, the fact that, listen, we can make something out of nothing, that we can survive off of,
Yes.
but not literal sense, because that literal sense was not meant for our good. It was meant as just, hey, here's just the fat, here's the other aspects. So that's what my growing sentiment of slave food is that when we look back culturally, and you can speak to this more than I can with your travels, it's just more from my reading, that we look at the root vegetables and we look at the richness of the soil that pertains inside of Africa. And we see that not only in Africa, around the world, that hence the reason of blue zones. The most long lived individuals around the world,
Yeah.
multiple societies are predominantly plant based. And so they're eating food of the earth that's rich, and you want to, but it's not until we move in this Western culture that we begin to adopt these substances. But lastly, I'll say this, is that what
Hmm.
the slave food project is, why it's so complex for those of you out there who haven't watched it or seen it, is that it's not just a focus on food. It is looking at the intersection between stress, which everyone faces, the
Mm,
unique stressor of racial discrimination,
mm.
right? It could be racial discrimination, it could be gender, it could be orientation discrimination that's there, and its impact in the development of health disparities. But here's another unique component: nutritional stress. This relationship of how our food
Mm.
is related to our stress and our reaction, and that all leads in this crucible of conflict that leads to the birth of disease. And so that's really what this project is. It first is focusing on those of African descent, but it's not meant to be exclusive of others. Because I'll be honest with you, our intent was to start with the African American, then move over to the Hispanic, then move over to the indigenous population, then to
Well,
move over.
that's what I thought was so profound about the way you defined it. What was so profound about how you defined it was that it could be applicable to so many people. It could be applicable to anybody. And that's where I was like, oh, they trying to get this is deep, okay? Because it's because we all could be enslaved by food, and we also could look at, and maybe you can speak to this, like how things have evolved to now. Like we can look at how our food systems are set up now to control us as well, in a way, or you know what I mean. So I don't know if you could speak to just like how is it showing up now in our modern times.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy as we moved in this industrialized, and so this industrialized approach is specific to everyone. I'm going to tailor it according to African American experience, and so when many African Americans dealing in terms of segregation left the South, it was called the Great Migration, and where folks kind of ended up in the Northwest, they ended up inside California, dispersed all over. And this migration, they moved from lands where they could plant some foods, maybe they're sharecroppers, maybe they had owned their own, to moving now where you have these massive high-rise cities. They're living inside of apartments that may be required for cooking techniques, frying, and quick boiling. And what stays historians have shown is they've shown those of African descent were some of the first early consumers of fast food, eating street cart foods from Asian and Italian and various aspects that were there. And so it lent itself to this idea of enculturation. Then you transform through the embracement of soul food to our current state, right? In which now we see that you have the red zoning that occurred, and you have these areas that are devoid of grocery stores, this apartheid, so to speak, these areas that are devoid of grocery stores, that an overabundance, these swamps of calorie dense, nutritionally poor foods that were there. So now we tell people who've grown up in this environment and they become assimilated. And now it pretends over into the school system that they're subsidized by the government, right? So these food substances are subsidized in terms of standard American diet. Not only are they subsidized, and what that means is the price point is less. I can buy 5 burgers for $1. A salad's going to cost me $5. Which am I going
Mm-hmm.
to use? Right? That's going to trigger my dopaminergic
Mm-hmm.
receptors and make me addicted to it. Right? Not only is that, the government also sponsors the advertisement. So they now fund they
Mm.
take a step back. The government also they made these small business association loans that then allow many of these fast food establishments to enter into this environment. They subsidize the food so the price point's lower, and our tax dollars then go into the advertisement. Advertisement that studies have shown
Mm.
repeatedly are targeted towards people of black and brown complexion. So now we tell people, well, just choose better, make a better choice. Well, now we
Mm.
grew up in a city like I grew up in. I grew up in South Central LA, and I remember as a kid, didn't strike me until years and decades later. I drive with my dad, and we drive 20 plus miles to the grocery store. 20 plus miles to the grocery store
Wow.
for fruits and vegetables that were cheaper in more affluent areas, were nicer quality than the areas in which I lived. What That's nothing but what's called a food,
Wow.
certain food swamp, in other words known as food apartheid. So there's challenges that we face, and so the first step is knowledge, is understanding. And one of the key things is that we talk about the business of business is business. Now, I didn't come up with that, but we had an insider on one of our shows.
Huh.
He said, listen, Doc, I'm gonna tell you, these companies are not because they hate you. It's about the dollar. The dollar. The bottom line is dollar. The business of business is business. My business is health. Our business should be our
But
well-being.
wasn't slavery about the dollar too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And so we need to have, just like we talk about just social justice, how can you have social justice without having food justice, without having health justice? A revolution where people in certain communities aren't even able to partake of Social Security because they die sicker, they live sicker and die sooner. You live sicker
Mm.
working, you
Mm.
die before you can even reap the benefits of Social Security. You live with a lower wealth income, than other groups because you perhaps can't even afford it. My father-in-law, my father and my father-in-law died the same exact year. My father-in-law had been in and out of dialysis
Wow.
from high blood pressure, a treatable disease, a reversible disease by lifestyle. My father died from complications of diabetes that ravaged his body over the course of several decades. That is a preventable disease, right? The power is there. We just have to grab hold of it. It's like I give you a lottery ticket for $1 billion. Are you not going to pick it up? I'm picking it up. I'm picking it up, and I don't even play, but I'm picking it up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so you talked about dying sooner, and this podcast is about longevity because I'm obsessed with it.
Yes.
But when I look at some stuff about African Americans, I find it very interesting. So I see things about African Americans actually having longer telomeres, but that maybe they actually accelerate the rate of acceleration when exposed to like external stressors and stuff is actually faster than European American counterparts. I don't know how true that is or how many more studies need to be done exactly, but I find that fascinating. What kinds of research have you seen around longevity in African Americans?
No, I think to follow up, I think that's the key thing. And for those of you out there who are unfamiliar with telomeres, I think one of the key things is think of it like your shoelaces. And the caps of your shoelaces have this plastic tip, although we're trying not to use plastic as much as possible, right? And so, but when that plastic breaks and your shoelace frays, it's not as usable. It's a marker that there's a problem that's going on. And so at the tips of your DNA are capped. And when that cap recedes, it gets smaller and smaller. It's predictive of your death or that the lack of longevity that's there. And what studies have shown is just that. There's studies that have shown that 13-year-old African American youth who've gone through stress and social issues of discrimination have shorter telomeres than 40-year-old Caucasian women who have cancer. That's how powerful
Whoa.
it is. That's how powerful it is.
Gee.
But here's the saving grace, right? We know that when you are embraced, when you come together as a community, when you begin to feed that body, right, mind, body, and spirit, that you can lengthen the telomeres, or what studies are showing with that. Studies have shown that
Mhm.
even looking at like the lights of Dr. Blackburn and Dr. Ornish have shown that in the setting of prostate cancer and breast cancer, that you can have lengthening of your telomeres by adopting, moving towards your diet that's more of the ancients, of whole food, plant based, of
Yeah.
moving more, of loving more, as opposed to hating. That these things begin the process of lengthening the telomeres. So there is robust studies and so
Yeah, and
these things.
no, for sure. And I was just going to add to what you were saying that meditation has been proven by research to lengthen telomeres.
Yes.
And it does so pretty significantly, especially if you're doing regular meditation. So it's like a lot of these lifestyle things are really it for
Oh, for sure. I mean, and the part I tell folks about meditation that's so important, and people may get scared by meditation or the concept like that. And I say, okay, well, fine, just focus on your breathing. Okay, fine, focus on prayer, that sort of thing. Wherever your thoughts are, where you're able to have some calming and centering. And studies have shown thickening of the prefrontal cortex. That's the reasoning part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that allows you to think and builds your resiliency, your willpower. And so studies have shown you're more inclined to be able to adapt and or adopt positive habits when you begin to embrace things like mindfulness and meditation. So you're absolutely right. But one of the key things I always kind of say when it comes to longevity is we speak about health span versus lifespan. And people say, well, doc, I'm not going to live forever. I'm not
Mhm.
even trying to live forever. It's about what my goal is for everyone is to increase your health span, right? What do I mean by that? That
Mhm.
period of time in your life where you're not chained to pills, you're not chained to procedures, that your calendar doesn't revolve around your doctor's appointments, that you're able to live life and live a life of purpose with your family and others is increasing your health span. And studies have shown African Americans have a shorter health span compared to other ethnicities on top of our lifespan,
Mm,
sicker and sooner.
interesting. So I would venture to say, so we know that racism is a part of it because clearly, just even from that example you gave, it's like, whoa. But then there's the health disparity issue, right? So the access to care. But that issue seems so big that it sometimes people are just like, well, I guess we should do nothing because it's just there's so much to do.
Yeah.
Where do you think that we need to start? Like, where is the starting point?
Well, I mean, I think on the individual reason why one of the many reasons I focus on nutrition is that's something that I make a choice every single day in what I put in my body. That's something I have control over to some degree. Now, we spoke about the environment that we're set up. It's an environment that may be set up to fail for many of us in terms of our access to bodegas, the convenience stores that are there, that it's a conscious decision that's there. But it is something that you can tackle. That's one component of social determinants of health. The second thing that we can do is that, which is a corollary to that, is that our dollars speak volumes. We have huge
Mm,
power as a group, as African Americans, as people of Hispanic descent or Latin descent, we have huge purchasing power. We have to flex our dollars because guess what? Why are we now seeing this rise in plant based meats and everything says plant based on it? Because there's a recognition that there is an interest and that dollars are going there. Why wasn't that present 30 years ago? Because of the fact that it was not recognized that there was a value for it. And so we have to force
yeah.
with our dollars and have our athletes, have our celebrities to echo and to be a resounding voice with that. Not just people like me. I mean, I'm just another doctor out there. But when they see a celebrity like yourself, when they see others out there who are echoing and espousing the ideas of this, that's what gets people galvanized to make change. It's true.
That's so good. That's so so good. Anything else you'd like to add about just about longevity and health in general that people should focus on?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's like sitting on a three-legged stool or even a four-legged chair, right? We focus so much on one thing, and many inside the lifestyle nutrition world, we focus on food alone and not like you brought up mindfulness. Bring up moving. People are scared of exercise. I'm not exercising. I don't feel like just I say move, park further away. Take the stairs. Stand more than you sit. Just move around. Be functional. I mean, we lose sight in some of the basic old school stuff of chopping, standing and chopping. I like to joke around and say, just get neat with it. What's neat? Non exercise activity thermogenesis. Just by standing, you're burning calories. Just by moving, these are the components that can help your outlook because when we're faced with reality of people losing their jobs, of people being quarantined and isolated for times at length. And so when you look at like the mental outlook for everyone out there, they're like, it's too overwhelming. That's why there's been a rise in comfort foods right now. So we have to be intentional. We have to plan. Don't leave it to chance. You have to plan. What's my day going to look like? When am I going to eat? What am I going to eat? How am I going to get it? The food that I'm going to get. Be very specific. Get SMART goals. I want you to be specific and intentional. Don't say, okay, I'm going to eat more fruits and vegetables, doc. No, that don't fly. I want
Yeah.
you to tell me what vegetable are you going to eat? Don't tell me just vegetables. Are you going to eat spinach? No, I don't like spinach. You're going to eat Brussels sprouts? No, I don't like Brussels sprouts. You're going to eat mustards? Okay, I like mustards, or I like kale, or I like whatever. Be very specific. Then tell us a measurable amount. Or I'm going to eat as much as I can. What does that mean? A cup? A half a cup? Be very specific. Make it something that's attainable and relevant towards your goals. When I was in training, I remember I had this 6 foot tall Norwegian attending, and she would sit there
Hmm.
and say, Batiste, your plan has to match your impression. Your plan has to match. If your impression is this person has an infection, then your plan should be antibiotics or antivirals, whatever it may be. If your impression is there's a broken bone, this is your plan. If your plan is you want to live healthfully, if your plan is you want to live an ageless existence, then your plan has to be I'm daily working on tools that's going to take care of that plan, that impression,
Yeah.
right? That's really
Hmm.
that we have to seek. So that's what I want folks out there to remember. Your plan has to match your impression of what you want for your life. That's the key.
So good. Where can people find you online? And where can people, actually, I'll link the Slave Food Project as well, but where
Perfect.
can people find you online?
So I am an old hat, and so I'm I'm just getting into the whole idea of social media. But I do have a small presence on Instagram at Healthy Heart Doc, also on Facebook at Healthy Heart Doc, and then lastly on Twitter at I am Healthy Heart. So I'm starting to get more robust in terms of some of those activities out there and sharing thoughts and quips and various aspects. But looking forward to meeting all of you online too as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. This was an awesome conversation.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's always good chatting with you.